All right, welcome everyone. My name is Kurt. I'm a comic book colorist. Welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'll be coloring this drawing by Rebekah Isaacs. This is a cover for a book from Vault Comics called A Dark Interlude, with a very interesting character on the cover here. This is a crazy cover. There's butterflies and Shakespeare and flaming heads wearing robes. So it's one of those, the kind of cover you run across all the time. So on this one, I like to experiment on covers, and so I really wanted to do something kind of painty. And so I laid down that brown in the background, and I'm kind of letting a little bit of that brown come through. I'm not painting at full opacity right now, and you can see like some of that brown on some of the butterflies there. And even when I switch to start coloring in the robe, I kind of let that brown act as a shadow, and even when I switch to the red, it's not at a full opacity. And so what you end up with is a little bit of that brown coming through in almost every color. And so I think in traditional painting they call that having like a mother color, I think is the term for it, or one of the ways of describing it. Here I'm starting to do that red, and that's the reason why the background is green, and it's going to get greener. Right now it's a little washed out, that green and brown. I didn't really like the way that it was mixing toward the end, and so I really ended up pushing that to be much more green, so it really just almost is in conflict with the red, which is what you want for a cover. You want it to really stand out. So all these crazy colors in his head there are all based on what's in the book already. So I'm just going by some of the reference that was sent. And the only really kind of instructions going in that I got from Rebekah was to try to make the word Henry glow on his wings. So I'll do that a little bit later. I'm about to go ahead and, right here, and change the color of these lines, because in the book, his head is this very kind of hot pink magenta color, and I wanted to go ahead and get that in there and get it established, because not an easy color to work around, and so I wanted to get that in early, and so I went ahead and changed those lines here. At this point, I'm switched to a hard light layer, and I'm just painting on top of what's already there. I'm using this brush, this pure paint brush that I found on the Clip Studio assets store, or whatever it's called. It was free. I'm really treating his head as the light source here, and so I'm thinking about all the planes that would catch light facing that direction. You'll see it's not quite as bright on the sleeves going down his arm because they're not facing up, but his forearms, which are facing up, they're a little bit brighter. And all of this is really one color. I'm kind of letting the layer mode kind of dictate how bright it's getting by layering it over and over. Again, the brush is only about 40% opacity, so it really lets me kind of build that up. I did switch to a hotter, like a pink color here to get those really bright highlights right at the top, but you can't do a whole lot of really bright red. It just comes out pink, and so they're really just kind of almost like acting like accent colors. And same thing here, I'm using that same really bright pink color to highlight his hands. Here I'm starting to lighten the wings a little bit. They get lightened and darkened a couple of times over the image. And I didn't realize at this point that the edges of the wings they're burning. It's fire. And for whatever reason, I didn't put that together until later. I was like, oh, these things are burning. So I end up changing those edges on the wings from blue to orange. Those butterflies are actually based on some real butterflies. So they're actually not as intense, and I couldn't make them as intense as they are in reality. They're very, very, almost like an iridescent blue. I did the best I could with trying to duplicate that. Here I'm trying to get some of that, as much of that blue as I can. It's a really deep saturated royal blue, which can be kind of hard to print if you get it too out of control. But here I am trying to make the words Henry glow. I end up coloring behind them and then kind of erasing some of it from around there. Interesting effect though. At this point, I put an overlay layer on top and added that really bright orange to really make it just feel like there was a lot of heat, you know, very warm coming off this guy. And it splashed over the background, which I didn't really intend. I will fix that eventually. Still trying to dress up all these butterflies. There were lots of butterflies. And these are way off in the background, so I'm not spending a whole lot of time on them. Usually with things like that, you know, you can kind of throw around a couple of colors and a few of them, and your brain kind of fills in the rest. So I'm kind of just loosely throwing some highlights and some different colors on these things just so they'll stand out a little bit more. And the further back these butterflies go, the more that the lighter they get. And so the ones up front are darker, and the ones in the back are really light. And the ink lines on the ones in the far background are also a little bit lighter. So it kind of gives you this feeling that the butterflies are kind of all the way around him. And I don't think I've done all of those steps at this stage yet, but that's coming up shortly. Here I've realized that I need to make all of this look like it's on fire. And Rebekah draws on multiple layers, and so all of this was on one layer together, and so it made it pretty easy to select without having to worry about avoiding everything else. End up changing the lines to like a reddish color on that fire, and then just painting in some brighter yellows and things to make it look like it's burning. I decided here I wanted to go a little bit darker in the shadows. And so this is another hard light layer. I'm using kind of a deep brown color to throw these shadows in here. And this really helped with like just making the forms stand out and getting the shadows under his sleeves, falling on his robe. I was really happy with how that turned out. Darkening the background some at the top because it was starting to blend in with some of those wings, which I didn't really want. I end up putting a texture over that background. It's pretty subtle, but it was too smooth, and so I ended up putting like some kind of texture over the top, real low opacity. Here I'm just putting some of that orange light from behind him on his hands and the shadows that aren't being hit from the light from the top. Yeah, here's where I'm experimenting with butterfly colors. End up going really light blue on all the ones that are off in the distance. Still playing around with the colors on these butterflies. Basically trying to make them as intense a blue as I could that still worked with everything else. That wing that's really close right at the bottom is kind of meant to blend into the robe and everything. Like that's all there to just kind of frame him. Here's that texture I put in the background. Again, really low opacity. It's very subtle. You can barely see it, but it broke up the smoothness of those gradients and which made it look really digital. Even though this is digital, I don't necessarily want it to look that way. Or at least not obviously that way. Here's where I decided to green up the background a little bit more. And then I added a little bit of that green into the butterflies, kind of like a teal color there to have them play off the green in the background. Some of my rendering darkened the edges on those butterflies, so this is me adding that white little rim around the wings and beefing that back up. I was really happy with how this turned out. I did a little bit of a levels adjustment at the end just to add some contrast, and most of this was colored in Clip Studio Paint. I do have a link in the description of my new coloring course using Clip Studio, so if you want to check that out, please do help support the channel. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.